Good afternoon. Today's conference, Energy Storage Enhancements State of Charge Implementation Update, will begin in approximately 2 minutes. Please stand by. Again, please stand by. 1.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Energy Storage Enhancements State of Charge Implementation Update. On behalf of the Stakeholder Affairs Group, we welcome you to our not a stakeholder meeting, but an informational meeting update of an implementation update for this call. This meeting will be a little bit different. We will go over a little bit about the housekeeping reminders for this call, and then we will kick things off and hand it over to our team. As for this call, we would just want to quickly remind everyone we are recording this call for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. We do encourage comments and questions throughout this particular call, so we encourage those, but also keep in mind if you are repeating or other comments, please refrain from doing so. Instructions to ask a question for today's call is that you use the raise hand icon located in the lower toolbar. You'll hear a beep sound, and once you're unmuted at that time, you'll have to state your full name and affiliation. And then those who are dialed in only phone line, audio only, press #2. If you do experience any technical issues, my event producer is Adrian, and myself will help you out with any questions you may have. For today, let's go ahead and kick things off to Danny Johnson, who is here today, as well as a few others from the KISO team. But other than that, we will go ahead and kick things off. Go ahead, Danny.
Thanks, Brenda. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. So we're here today to discuss the ISO's planned implementation of the Energy Storage Enhancement State of Charge Constraint. As you may recall, the ISO held a stakeholder workshop to discuss next steps about how we could implement the approved policy with stakeholders in early August. We believe that we have a path to proceed forward on, which would be a viable next step, and this is actively being tested in MarketSim right now through the 13th, and we wanted today to provide an opportunity to answer any questions stakeholders may have and kind of explain to market participants how we've arrived at the decision to ideally, to the extent MarketSim comes out clean, proceed forward with this proposed implementation. Can we go to the next slide? So what was the problem? I want to take a minute and try to refresh anybody since it has been a couple months. The ESE constraint that was proposed included the regulation up and regulation down terms with an attenuation factor within the state of charge constraint. When this was implemented and tested in MarketSim, the results were that negative regulation prices occurred. And this was due to the optimization recognizing that regulation down could be discharged as energy later in the day at a profit. Negative regulation prices were determined by our legal group to not be supported by the existing tariff. So we pressed pause and we went back to the stakeholders and kind of like laid out what had happened and what our options were. I think one option was to proceed with the proposed implementation, which I think would have required some additional regulatory approval based off that legal determination. We discussed the envelope equations that are proposed as a part of the day-ahead market enhancements initiative. The proposal was to add the regulation terms similar to the imbalance reserve terms in that equation. That also may have needed additional tariff authority, but to the extent that there was broad support, I think the ISO would have been interested in pursuing that avenue. During that meeting, PG&E actually brought to our attention a proposal to concurrently implement the previous ESE state of charge constraint as well as the new ESE state of charge constraint as a two-constraint solution, which they posited would be able to get us the desired policy outcome of making sure regulation awards are considered within state of charge in the day-ahead market, while also hopefully getting rid of the phenomenon that those regulation awards, specifically reg down, would receive negative prices due to that intertemporal relationship with energy later in the day. So can we go to the next slide? So this was the proposal put forward by PG&E. You can see the top turn here is the ESE state of charge constraint that was put forward by the ISO in the most recent policy proposal. This is what was approved. So it simply considers regulation up and regulation down, multiplied by some attenuation factor within the state of charge. It's also bounded by the resources upper and lower limit. And then this third line is the existing state of charge constraint. And when you put these two things together, we believe that this does offer a path forward to implement the consideration of regulation within the state of charge constraint. The SOCAT should control for the feasibility of energy and regulation awards, since they're both feeding back into that equation. But the SOCEN term, this should ensure that to a large extent, the energy dispatch will be dictated by the results of energy awards. The idea here is that if you have a 100 megawatt regulation down award and you have a 20% attenuation factor, that'll be incorporated in the SOCAT, but that 20 megawatt hours of energy doesn't get included in this SOCEN constraint, which simultaneously has to be met so that that 20 megawatt hours of energy is not being dispatched later in the day as an energy award. So again, we believe this largely negates the interaction between the regulation and energy within the SOC constraint that led to the problematic negatively priced regulation down awards. And I do want to offer that going forward, I think that is having this linkage directly in the market, if you could get the attenuation factors right, it is a reasonable path forward, but we do recognize that it's a much larger discussion, since it kind of would force us to rethink how the ancillary services are procured for CAISO as a whole. And at this time, at least, we don't think that's the prudent outcome to try to push this through without giving additional time to consider this relationship in the context of all AS awards. Can we go to the next slide? So, while I said this is in MarketSim, it is in MarketSim, it's available for testing. Given that when we previously tested this, we had unexpected results, we want to be deliberate in how we implement this solution if we decide through MarketSim that this is the path we want to take. One, it's not an enhancement so much as it's a slightly different implementation. We have the functionality to have hourly attenuation factors in each direction. So I think previously the way this has been presented, and parties may have thought of this, is it's one attenuation factor in each direction for the entire day. And there's been a lot of comments that might not be indicative of stress conditions or conditions throughout the entire day. We think that this at least is a step in the right direction towards having a more accurate attenuation factor on how those regulation awards are feeding back into the state of charge constraint. Next, we want to step in this constraint. So we don't want to implement the full attenuation factors immediately. Our thought was across a 4-month period, maybe go from whatever those final hourly values would be, start at 25%, the next month go to 50%, the next month go to 75%, and then finally implement the attenuation factors at the studied values that the ISO will be publishing. We think that this will give the ISO and market participants additional chances to monitor the implementation of this proposed solution and ensure that the market results are as expected. So I'd like to stop there and see if we have any questions.
Let's go to Alva first.
Elvis Svoboda, PG&E. So appreciate this information about the attenuation factors starting low and going up. The one thing I was wondering about, since you're going to essentially, that means you'll be announcing attenuation factors for each month. Would you potentially look at what's actually happening in reg takes before just simply linearly increasing them? I mean, because it could turn out that there were changes even in that period that you'd want to implement. So is it maybe phrasing it in terms of whatever your hypothetical attenuation factors that you want it to be in a particular month, it's going to be 25 or 50% or 75%, as opposed to simply targeting an endpoint that you may find is not where you want to go. Just a suggestion there. Thank you.
So are you kind of thinking, Alva, that if right now we have it as 50% 4 months from now, rather than going 12,
Right.
25, 37, 50%, we would instead kind of be iteratively monitoring what's actually happening in the regulation market, and if the awards, if it should be 60% instead, we adjust midstream?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Or 40% or whatever, just so that you get as accurate as possible by the time you've fully implemented these factors.
I think we can, yeah, I think that's something worth thinking about. I don't know if we have a handle on exactly how often we're planning on refreshing the attenuation factors. And so it's something we'll consider. And then I think in the BPM process, kind of working with everybody to define how often these will be refreshed is also something we'd be interested in doing. Because I think that directly feeds into the implementation.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
Thanks, Alva.
Let's go to Aditya from SCE. Let's go ahead.
I was wondering, is the CAISO planning to publish stakeholder comments response matrix?
I do not believe the ISO is planning on publishing a stakeholder comment response matrix on this item.
Will there be any publication, like at least within, like an addendum perhaps, that would address stakeholder comments? Because I just saw one line saying in support of PG&E's formulation, and other than that, I didn't see any addressing of stakeholder comments.
Well, there was a diverse set of stakeholder comments. Our takeaway from that is that there was not unanimous support, but there was a broad level of support for proceeding forward with this constraint. And that being said, some stakeholders disagreed with implementing any ESE constraint at all, while some others offered that we should maybe go even farther and consider real-time AS and a deviation settlement. And so this seemed to be a feasible implementation option that was fairly broadly supported. I guess, Aditya, is there a specific, anything specifically you'd be looking for us to address?
Yeah, so actually Edison put out some pretty technical comments regarding the formulation of both the envelope equations proposed by the CAISO and PG&E. And if you're proposing implementation with, I mean, those concern technical issues that need to be vetted before moving forward. And that's basically my concern, is you're moving forward without, which seemingly not vetting the equations that could cause problems, especially because our comments were about technical concerns.
And I did read through the comments, and frankly, I wasn't quite able to follow the concern. My takeaway was that the attenuation and regulation terms should be removed from the ESE equation. Can you shed any, I guess, more nuance on what your concern is? There's an interaction that the terms are elsewhere within the optimization, and it seemed like the proposal was to remove them from the state of charge constraint.
Adrian, can you go unmute Aditya from SCE? He was still responding.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I think I remember in some of the calls mentioning don't press the mute button, and I did that. Thank you. So yeah, specifically, the concerns we had were around the way the way the product awards were being incorporated, where an envelope, basically what the envelope equations are. They're trying to figure out what is the most and the least in terms of state of charge that a resource can have. And there was some addition of incremental, well, lumping together really of incremental and decremental awards that we disagreed with. That was what we were going around. Very much the basics of how, of what would contribute to the maximum possible state of charge and the minimum possible state of charge that are possible. So that was regarding the envelope constraints. Regarding the PG&E's formulation, we'd made some suggestions, actually even to, I believe, Michael Volpe during the actual meeting, last meeting. We did not see those incorporated. We want to make sure that at least there's a little bit more exploration of that, rather than just going forward without exploring whether or not those concerns will produce feasible results. And here's why I'm stressing on that. If you go ahead and implement, say, I think PG&E formulation has merit to it, but if you go ahead and implement without the vetting, as we had noted, you can end up with outcomes that, yes, may seem okay, but perhaps some other issues may turn up later on. Just trying to make sure that things are thoroughly vetted.
Okay, thank you, Aditya.
Next, we have Kelly Wells. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Actually, I think, Dan, you flash forward to the next slide, and I think that might answer my first question. But just to confirm something that you said earlier, I know the original proposal, one of the issues that came out of that testing was it resulted in the negative AS prices. And in the paper you guys posted, this new formulation does not result in negative REG prices. Is that correct? And has your guys' testing shown that to be the case?
We haven't seen negative regulation prices to date, and we reran the original cases, and then we reran some peak, I think we reran a peak load day from this summer to try and test this during a much more stressed system condition.
Okay, and you guys haven't seen that. So by separating out those two constraints, you've kind of disconnected that relationship between the energy and AS that was causing kind of those negative prices with the original proposal.
I wouldn't say it's an absolute disconnect because energy and regulation are still co-optimized, but it removes the direct connection, which we think was largely responsible for the negative regulation down prices.
Fair enough. Yep. Okay, that makes sense. And then my second question I had, and I guess it's more of a detailed question, is on when you had the slide showing the different formulations, you did show that third constraint that will ensure that the SOC for energy is still within the min-max. And there's other constraints in the market that also use SOC. Is my assumption correct in that all of the other constraints that use SOC will still use SOC energy, or will some of those also use SOC AT? And are you also going to have a similar constraint that, like this SOC energy between min and max, apply to SOC AT?
So I have Fan on the line, and I think he can probably do a better job of answering that, the implementation than me. So I'd ask Fan.
Yeah, hi, Katie. You can imagine SOC AT is a new variable, so it doesn't apply, it doesn't exist in any other place. So for all other constraints, that SOC is SOC energy.
Okay, that's what I was assuming was going to be the case, but I just wanted to confirm, just because now we have each resource will have two different SOC values.
Yeah.
So thank you. Okay, that makes sense, and that's all I had. Thanks, Danny.
Thanks, Kelly, and thank you, Fan.
Dawn Trethaway, you're next.
From GDS Associates from CSET. I wanted to follow on with SCE's comments because I think he made some very good points. I think if we move forward with putting this in place, and I don't think we've guaranteed. First of all, I would start with what PG&E proposed has gone a long ways in addressing the observations of negative regulation down prices, but it hasn't eliminated it. And that's because they're still within the, what you could call the offer value or the bid value of the regulation products, is there is this assumption that there's going to be some regulation energy coming to the resource at at a cost that's basically zero or assumed to be zero, which is not the same as what their energy prices are. And so I think we really need to be careful making these sort of changes. And, you know, if we determined that the tariff language previously wouldn't have allowed us to implement it because we saw reg down prices, but we do know that this is still going to have the impacts on how the reg down bid prices are potentially put together and reg up bid prices end up being. And we can't guarantee, I don't know how you cannot move forward with additional tariff changes to allow, you know, what would now be a more rare instance of negative prices, but not a guarantee that you won't have negative prices. So I think this just needs a lot more time and consideration, especially given the implementation of the 50% rule, which should go a long way to addressing the operational concerns by limiting the award quantity, which, yes, it does have a price impact, but it doesn't have the same price formation questions. It has just simply a reduction in the amount of supply that they can offer. So I think our position would be, I would take a lot more time thinking about this than rushing to hit some November 1st deadline. Thanks.
Thanks, Don. So just to make sure I kind of can summarize and understand, you're just positing that the ISO do more testing on this or more technical vetting or both?
I think you need more. I think you need more testing. I think we need more technical discussions about it. And I think we do need a tariff change to make sure that we don't, you know, I don't know, what would we do if we all of a sudden observe negative prices? Would we self-report that we've got a tariff violation? And then what would we do? And so, like I said, I think if you wanted to move forward with something like this because you think it's got low risk, I still think you'd want to have the tariff protections on it. And we should then also commit that this is a temporary issue until we get to have, you know, more discussions in either the price formation phase 3 portion of the price formation discussions, or in the next energy storage enhancements initiative. Because, like I said, I think if you look back at the stakeholder process on this, I don't think there was much discussion about how you're changing the fundamental way that the bid price for storage resources providing regulation are changing. I think you were focused on trying to make sure that you got awards that were feasible. And the 50% rule does that. This introduces new complexities that I don't think have been fully appreciated.
Thanks, Don. Yeah, the 50% rule helps. I don't think that's a total solution either, which is why we were concurrently looking to implement this. But your point is well taken about potentially considering additional testing and technical vetting of this. But I see Khalid, who's a panelist at the ISO, has his hand up, so I want to see if he has anything to weigh in with. I think you might be double muted, Khalid.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So, Don, I think there is, I wanted to clarify a little bit what we are trying to do, which is actually to help, not to introduce more risk, is actually to reduce risk. And the first equation that is shown here on this slide is the one that was implemented and approved by the policy. So we are not trying to reopen policy here or you know, have kind of a debate, you know, whether this is the right way or not the right way. This has been vetted and the policy has been approved, right? When we implemented this constraint as is, in replace of the existing constraint that was only having the energy in it, which is like in this equation here, it was the P plus and P minus. We have actually, by implementing it this way, we implemented the policy or the intent of the policy to have the regulation impact or to consider the regulation impact on the state of charge. However, we have introduced an unintentional linkage between the energy and the regulation in a way that the program was seeing, oh, there is opportunity for me to increase my regulation in support of increasing my state of charge so I can dispatch more. That is actually the main issue that we, when we talked about it before this summer, we said, yeah, the negative prices is maybe a result of that, because now you are trying to procure more than what you need and you are hitting the maximum constraint on the regulation. The negative prices are coming from hitting that maximum constraint instead of just procuring what you actually need. This interaction was not, we felt that it went above and beyond what the policy and what the discussion with the stakeholders have been about this particular equation. And the proposal that we got from talking actually PG&E and others, but PG&E was, explaining a little bit more, and where, we work it out with the other stakeholders as well, is the fact that, hey, we can still do exactly what the policy wants us to do and eliminate that unwanted or undesired reaction or coupling. And that's what Dan is talking about here. Now, is the current, even without implementing any of these, just for the, based on the current implementation in the market, would there be possibilities for negative pricing? Yeah, if you hit the maximum constraint on the AS, you may actually get some negative pricing. However, it is very rare, and even if it happens, we have other mechanisms to zero out, to cap the negative to zero in the settlement when we are doing our settlement. So we have a protection to allow us to, to enforce our current tariff, right? Even though Don, that the tariff was written at a time when the rig up was actually in the minds of people, but the tariff is written in a language that doesn't differentiate between rig up and rig down and all of that. So that is what the beauty of this approach is. It doesn't go beyond what has been discussed with the stakeholder and has been approved. It is actually eliminating the risk of adding more situations. And when we looked at the market sim, we found out that if we don't implement it the way that it is proposed now, we will end up with many cases of negative prices. Almost every market run, every day ahead market, the program will find ways to find that negative price. And this, what proposed approach is actually reducing this and putting it in the same almost probability that we have today without those constraints. So we are not increasing risk. We are actually reduce the risk to where it's supposed to be. And we do have a mechanism to handle it in case it happens, like you said. Hopefully that helps.
So Led, I agree with what you said. I think that what PG&E proposed has reduced the probability of seeing this price impact. But I think I didn't actively participate in the stakeholder process, but my understanding is a lot of people asked in that stakeholder process for examples and how this would work. And I don't think it was fully appreciated that putting in some expected regulation deployment in these SOC charges came along with this interesting price formation issue. So I think that's the point that I'm trying to make, that it probably does warrant additional discussions. And to the extent that the CAISO thinks that there isn't a tariff issue on this, then I think we then I think at a minimum, we have to say, we have to discuss this more, because I don't think that people fully comprehended what making this change would make. And what, and again, the key thing to remember, that this is just applying to storage. I think you could make other assumptions that other use limited resources, maybe you need to make these sort of considerations. So.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Thanks, Don.
Brenda, can we move to Drew?
Yes, Drew, your line's unmuted. Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Could you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Drew Scow, Fluence Energy. I guess I have two questions. First of all, I think this has been addressed a little bit, but it'd be great if, I guess, the ISO could share a little bit of the need that they still see, some examples of why that need still exists, or what market conditions might lead to that need still existing, because that 50% award rule is definitely has gone, I think, a long way towards ensuring deliverability. So I'm not sure what remains, what conditions remain that would necessitate this change as well.
I mean, that 50% rule by definition doesn't provide 100% coverage, which was, I think, why this was approved as part of the original policy. So at this time, I don't think that we're going to go back and look to try to justify the need to implement approved policy still.
Okay. And I guess then the next piece is, as this moves into operation, the plan to put these in BPMs is a little bit, it honestly seems a little bit ridiculous to me. This is, you publish, for example, your bid price caps available via an API. This is something that's also necessary for participants to use in their bid formulation and any optimizations they're running. Modeling of CAISO's state of charge modeling, not having that available as data, that's collected by a computer as though it's data, rather than by a human out of a document that's a Word document or a PDF, is a little bit insane. And I would personally like to see this kind of put into something that's available via an API, whatever those attenuation factors are. And it would be great to understand the kind of timelines that we would know when those are going to change, how much notice you might get, as well as the frequency that they might be updated.
Okay, that's something we can take back and see if we can make the information more easily and readily available. Thanks, Drew.
Yeah, thank you.
Kathleen, you're next. Go ahead.
Great, thank you. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Kathleen.
Hey, how's it going? A couple questions, but before, I just wanted to clarify one thing on the back and forth between, on the comment of implementing things that are consistent with what was approved from the policy or not. And I think, honestly, we're in a bit of uncharted territory. And I think it's a little bit more nuanced than what I heard you say, Danny. I just wanted to tease something out to kind of illustrate why I see it as more complicated. And the reason is that what was stakeholder and what was approved was actually not a 50% limit on your operating range. It was 75%. So part of the push and pull during the stakeholder process, right, was you had a suite of these multiple proposals. And I think we were trying to find, or let me put it this way, I understood why the CAISO was trying to find balance between a couple different proposed solutions, allowing for more of the operating range to receive an award paired with some enhancements to the stated charge calculation. When you implemented the first phase, though, you implemented something tighter and more restrictive than what was agreed upon or what was the compromised outcome of the approved policy that was taken to the board. So when you hear some kind of questions probing on that, for me, it comes from, since you implemented a 50%, which was much stricter than what was approved in the policy, perhaps that has offset some of the need for the other solution. And so once you start to not implement the policy as approved, it does crack open the door to ask other questions.
Yeah, I don't think I can shed a lot of insight on the 50% for 75%. I've understood it to be 50, and I don't see our legal team on the call here. Maybe somebody from the implementation side has more background, but I think, Kathleen, regarding these constraints, our legal interpretation, and I trust in ISO's legal department, is that we do have the tariff authority to implement it as proposed in this slide.
Yeah, no, and I don't disagree, and there's no, that is a completely 100 accurate statement, Danny. You have the tariff authority to implement a very broad range of things in your market based on what was filed and approved. I'm just teasing out a nuance in the back and forth because I think it's slightly more authentic than to say, well, you guys are proposing an implementation consistent with board policy, and you're not willing to kind of engage in the conversation, but at the same time, you implemented a different solution earlier this year that was not consistent. So I think it's just better to maybe put that narrative aside and let's just talk about the merits of what you're proposing is what I'm recommending. But with that in mind, I just want to talk about the merits of what you're proposing now. I recognize it's not what was stakeholder and approved, and we're in a different place. So I have a couple questions. So my first question is, I'm trying to catch up and find things, and there's a lot of information. So my first question is, in the release planning, in the business requirements, does this proposal, are the BRQs already in place in the current BRSs, or is that something that's coming down the pike?
I would defer to Fan or Trang on that, but my understanding, I think, would be yes, since it's the original constraint and then the new constraint that was in the published BRS. But I don't know if any separation between the two has been published. But can somebody from the implementation team help me with that?
Yeah, thank you.
Trang is here. And I think Van unmuted too, but or in Khaled actually. So actually, I'm going to let Khaled speak to it first, and then I can fill in any other details. So Khaled, did you want to speak to that first?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, this has been, the way that is you're looking at it at the slide right now has been requested in the BRS, and it has been implemented, and it has been, like Danny said, tested, and is available for the market participants to see it and even test it. Now, I haven't looked if the first two at the top are the one that what was, as I said, it's exactly matching what was in the policy paper at the time when the policy was approved. The last two are the existing constraints that we currently have in the market today, right? So there's nothing new here that we introduced that was not part of the business requirements or implementation. See, so this slide, thank you for flipping the slide. So this slide, the equation at the top is what the policy paper had. It's just if you replace, the P with energy, I think you will, and the muse with the attenuation factor, you will get the same exact constraint. Even for this policy, the equation was actually listed. Typically, we don't list equations but in this case, it was actually listed. And part of our discussion with the implementation team, Kathleen, was is kind of we kind of says that our hands were tied, so we implemented it as what the policy exactly said this way. And we did not implement it, and we didn't move it to production based on the comments that we had at that time. Says, hey, this seems to introduce another relationship that we did not talk about it. And we agreed with that, and we stopped the implementation before the summer, and we said, let's take the time to see how we can implement the policy without, of course, deviating from the policy, but mathematically how we can implement it. And PG&E came up with the mathematical implementation without deviating from the policy and removing that coupling. So I think that's where we are. The other discussions about 50 or 75, I think it's not, it may not be the one that we wanted to focus on today, because that seems to be some different, you've been in some stakeholders that were discussing this. But the only thing that we want to focus in here today is this mathematical formulation of an approved policy. And in order even to reduce that risk that people, we have here, we are trying to even reduce that attenuation factor. We don't start with the attenuation factor that we think it could be maybe inaccurate, or if we need more time to find out what that number will be. I think Danny mentioned that we are willing even to start with something small. So all of these are reduction or mitigation factors for any unintended consequences. But at the end of the day, we would like to implement the approved policy that, we are talking about the implementation team. We added, we in this call today, we have asked for more people actually to, like, stakeholders to join, because we wanted the transparency of what actually happened during the implementation, right? The mathematical formulation that we are showing here was not exactly fully probably stated in the policy paper, but that's the mathematical formulation that we think mimic what the policy paper wants to do. Thanks.
So led my question. Let me try to rephrase my question. So I understand what the policy did. I understand the equations you're showing. I understand the ESC BRS that existed, and that was implemented. But what we discussed at the last workshop were a few different options, as Danny already summarized.
Yeah.
One of them was PG&E. I'm understanding from this update that you are deciding to move forward with that. And some of PG&E, the way that PG&E kind of, or at least leverage it, how it was proposed is not the same that was in the policy. At least it's not my current understanding. So either I'm highlighting for you that we need more vetting, because I understood those constraints to be 24-hour horizons, looking out over the entire day, having an energy constraint and having the AS constraint. And I'm trying to figure out if that new formulation is in the current BRS, or if there's a revised version coming out that includes the newer formulation of it. Does that make more sense the way I'm phrasing that?
Yes, I think I understand you, but the BRS has this equation that we have in front of us here, and that's what the additional equation that we are implementing on top. I want to go back and see, to your point, if the BRS states like that we are implementing this equation in addition to the existing one, rather than saying in replacement of the existing one. That's all what the BRS, if it's not saying in addition, then we have to make sure that it says that. I will go back and take your point. Thanks.
Yeah, that would be super helpful. The other thing that would be super helpful, if you could just double check, is what Fan answered to Callie. That's been one source of my confusion as well. So for the AS stated charge constraint and the end of horizon stated charge constraints that already exist, if the BRS could note whether it's the SOC AT or SOC energy, that would be incredibly helpful and appreciated.
We'll do that, Karen.
Let me ask. Thank you. Yeah, I think at this juncture, as much to like transparency, so that we can kind of think about it and be prepared for a release, I think is the most important thing. The second most important thing to us right now is the question is what Danny you raised, and I mean this is more for you and something you can take as an action item if you wouldn't mind, is the monitoring the implementation. So when I want to give you an example of what we're struggling with being able to do that, is that when, like, back when the stakeholder process happened, it was launched, an issue was raised saying that we're awarding out of day ahead regulation awards over continuous hours in a way in which in real time, the deployment factor or attenuation factor deployment rate is such that that resource is being exhausted of their state of charge and can't meet that regulation need. And so we're not meeting our BAL requirements. So that's how I understand the problem statement. I think we can define metrics to track that. And so, myself and others had asked for some of that transparency, and I'm still catching up. So maybe it's been provided since I was been out of the office, but that's my question. Have we provided those metrics yet so that we can track and monitor how the last energy storage enhancement implementation has changed that metric, and then how we can, and then continue to track if this one gets released, how that metric also fluctuates?
So if I'm understanding you correctly, Kathleen, you'd like the ISO to produce more metrics on how regulation awards are being exhausted by the SOC exhaustion as both a means to test this implementation as well as to determine if this is still an outstanding issue that needs additional design around?
Correct. Yeah, I think
we can take that back. We haven't put out anything since our last call that would address your ask, so we can take this back.
That would be awesome. Because even if, let's say you implement this November 1st, it would be helpful to see how things have changed, and then so that we can track it and make that available. And if you can just help point us towards where to look for that, if it's the MPPF, if it's maybe it's a DMM report, I'm not presupposing the venue, but some better guidance on where we can look as a community to see if additional changes or revisiting is needed once this gets unrolled would be appreciated and helpful.
Yeah, it's a fair request. I can't commit to you right now regarding it because, as you noted, there's different ways that the ISO could put forward this information, but it's definitely something I'll take back and we'll consider because I do understand its value.
We do have Alva back online, but let's give Mike McGruffin a time to speak up really quick before he go back to Alva, if that's okay. Go ahead, Mike.
Mike, are you there?
Adrian, can you go ahead and unmute Mike?
Sorry, we tapped the button at the same time. So, hey, Danny, this is Mike McGuffin from CES. So just a couple of quick points. The ISO obviously has the authority to implement tariff changes, but I think you do, to follow on with what Drew said, I do think the onus is on the ISO to demonstrate that you need to implement this. I do think changes really were significant and have, I suspect, dramatically improved your real-time situation. So I think the onus is on you guys to prove that this is needed this quickly. And then just also on the attenuation factor. So as somebody that has tried to forecast regulation dispatch for the last several years, I can tell you that you guys will be wrong. And the impact of how wrong you are will have impacts on the market. It's fairly difficult to forecast, but I don't know that I suspect you guys will want to change the factors more frequently than you could via BPM. So, publishing those as was previously recommended via OASIS or Cyber would be better. But also, I'm not sure if a phased approach would actually make things better or worse, just given there will be an error. And I think in creating a larger error on purpose may have some unintended consequences. And then again, like the phased approach, would you start at a high value for reg down and then lower it, or how would that work as well in the phased approach?
I think we can get you more information on that through the PRR process. And I do recognize, like, this is an inexact science, right? We're never going to be 100% with the regulation. Our thought at the ISO is trying to consider some regulation is probably more accurate than zero impact of regulation on state of charge. So it is a moving target. On the first point, I do want to address that. I think the ISO has a stakeholder process. This was stakeholdered. It was approved through our board. It was then approved at FERC. And so I don't think at this juncture the ISO needs to do anything more to justify implementing this policy, because we've taken all the agreed upon steps and have our governance and regulatory approval to approve it. So I just want to leave that there. And I don't think that we're interested in trying to relitigate previously approved policy in today's call.
No, and like I said, I think you do have the authority. I think the problem is giving the market 3 weeks to test and implement their side. It does change the way that you're offering into the market for everybody that's selling ancillary services from a storage resource. So it's not like you're just flipping a switch. There are preparations that have to happen on our end.
I guess I would ask, was there any, like, the preparations on your side, like, we're implementing the two constraints concurrently, but are you talking about how you'd formulate your regulation bids with what Don was highlighting, that the value of energy flows through them kind of regardless of this coupling or not, or is it more of a technical challenge on your side?
So it's both. So everybody that's offering a mix of ancillary services and energy from storage is trying to model where their SOC is going to be at any given time. That's the only way that you can effectively offer into the market. There will be an error. So basically it takes the problem and just shifts it. So now it's a problem of just trying to forecast versus what you think the dispatch will be, versus now you create a forecasting of an error between the ISO's attenuation factors and reality. So it just shifts the problem a bit, but that's what everybody's trying to do. So anybody that's selling those products is doing that now. That's just, now we're going to be comparing the ISO's attenuation and reality. So it just introduces another element to the problem.
Okay. I understand what you're saying, Mike. Thank you.
Alva, you're next. Go ahead.
Hello. I had just a couple things. One is in terms of what we've observed, a counterexample to the idea that you don't need both of these. If you anticipate and I'll just really simply, if your battery is going to be at full charge at the beginning of the day, you should not be getting reg down awards in the first hour, or you shouldn't be getting reg down awards until your state of charge has come down to some level where you can provide reg down. In the current setting, you can get a full reg down award in the first hour. And I'm speaking loosely there because you have the constraint. I mean, it's not the maximum, but it's the maximum level that will allow you to provide a full award of reg down. But the issue is that you can get that full award because of these 50% energy bids. The CAISO has some ability to move in the real-time market to adjust to attempt to move your state of charge to where you can provide the regulation. But it doesn't have any control over what happens between the 5-minute instructions. And so we've observed situations where the energy market is attempting to keep state of charge at a feasible level, but regulation is still driving us up above the level that we're supposed to be going to. So I think procuring in such a way that you recognize in the CAISO market that there's going to be some energy accompanying regulation is really important to getting a good set of regulation schedules for the purposes of the CAISO, but also for the purposes of market participants over the day. Right now you can get a full set of 24 hours of full reg down awards from, let's just say, from half an hour's worth of buffer. And that really isn't a reasonable solution, given that we're seeing an average of almost 50% energy take in every hour of the day. It's obviously going to lead to a result where CAISO is continuously trying to just keep the battery at a state of charge where it can provide the regulation, and that may, in fact, affect the use of the battery for the regulation. The other comment I wanted to make was on the question of the negative price. This is just a thought experiment, and it's not a certainty. But if we think about the example that Yannick provided us, explaining the negative prices in the previous implementation, it had to do with charging in a current hour because you're going to get benefit from discharge in a future hour. So that situation cannot happen in the revised implementation. What could happen is that you could say, well, you need to charge in the current hour to support a reg up award in a future hour. But think about what that requires. It means that you have to charge in the current hour to enable any reg up to be, or incremental reg up to be awarded in that future hour. So essentially you're in a situation where you're charging in the current hour because and you're doing reg down in the current hour because you're going to want to have reg up in a future hour where you've been taken to minimum, essentially. I would just suggest that means that you have to have been driven down to minimum over the course of many hours in order for that, in the optimization, for that to be a reasonable outcome. And I think that's a very unlikely outcome because there's too many degrees of freedom in the optimization to force the solution to see the only source of value or the only way that you can support reg up in a future hour is to charge in a current hour at a price that drives the ancillary service price to a negative number. I'm not working out, obviously, the details because I can't do it necessarily, but I do think that it's a much more difficult scenario even to demonstrate that it can happen than the scenario that did happen in market sim previously. That's just my opinion. And maybe other people can work out the details and show that I'm wrong, but I do think it's very unlikely that you need to charge in the current hour in order to get an incremental megawatt of reg up in a future hour.
Thanks, Alva. I think I agree with everything you said, and that last dynamic was why I tried to be a little careful a few slides ago, that there is still the linkage, but I think we internally our assessment is we think that it's not a very strong linkage nor very likely to result in negative reg down prices.
I mean, if you get 100% reg up takes, so then reg up looks just like energy, anything can happen, but we're seeing just the opposite, and we have seen for a couple of years now. So I think we certainly have the time to adjust if we see radical changes in the amount of reg uptake that would make this kind of situation a more reasonable one. But I don't think it can happen under the current attenuation factors.
Thanks, Alva. And I think this also kind of brings back Kathleen's point that to the extent that the ISO can provide more data about how this is actually working, I think that can inform if problems are on the horizon, we may better be able to forecast them.
Yeah, I think, Danny, also, I just want to leave this quick comment is that the ISO wants to do the right thing. So when this was discussed, it was discussed as something that will help us create more realistic dispatches for operation, as well as pricing wise and market still doing what it's supposed to be doing. I want to maybe emphasize that if during this time, right, when people are looking at testing, and if somebody finds something that actually like what we did before the summer, if something really major comes out, we will not enforce something that will that has a problem, right? We need to be please let us know. We'll work together. We'll come up with the best forward. It's not like we are trying to meet November 1st. I don't want to send that wrong message. It's actually just we're trying to see why not November 1st, right? If there is anything that pops up, we will talk about that. But so far, I think we have reached to some very it's a solution that minimizes these risks that we are talking about here, and at the same time, it gives what we were supposed to be implementing, right? That's what I wanted to say. But please, keep us informed if you run into anything. If not, then the question is why not November 1st? Okay.
Thanks, Khalid. Do we have any more calls or questions that the ISO can answer? If not, I think we're ready to conclude. We're not going to go through the results. These will be publicly posted, and they should be in the addendum that the ISO published last week.
Danny, I do see one more question. Michael from PG&E.
Yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Michael.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Danny, for all your work on this. I was wondering if you thought that during this stage implementation over the 4 months, we could also look at whether the implementation in the real time is kind of going as expected or is appropriate. We kind of in our presentation, the workshop, we kind of left it as an open question. Does this make sense in the day ahead or real time or both? I realize it's in the tariff authority to implement in both, but I was wondering if we could look at that over the implementation.
Yeah, I think consistent with what Khalid said earlier, we do plan to monitor to make sure that this isn't throwing off bad results that aren't consistent with the intent of the policy. So I think that's something that we would look to monitor as well.
Chris Devon, go ahead.
Hello, this is Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Danny. Chris Devon, TerraGen. Thanks for the call, and I wanted to thank Alba for that explanation. And the thought that I had going back to kind of some of the earlier discussions was perhaps if this does occur where there is some observation of the negative AS pricing and the CAISO has to zero that out, is that documented anywhere, like in the price correction reports or talked about perhaps at like the MPPF calls or market updates or something along those lines? Just curious if there's any way that we might have some future venue to review this stuff if it does happen.
I don't know offhand, so I'd turn to one of my fellow panelists to see if they know where this information might be captured.
Sorry, what's the question again?
Sure. It just basically going. Well, go ahead, Khaled, if you needed to.
Yeah. So when something like this happens, we would catch it even before it goes to settlement, in the what we call the MQS, which is the model that prepares the information to settlement, and we will do the price correction over there at that stage, even before settlement sees those numbers. But as I said, you know, we haven't noticed. I mean, currently the same risk exists with the current market design, and we haven't seen these happening. But if it does happen, then that's the place where we're catching. I will go and look for like in the price correction documents, if there is an existing something there, and there must be something there already from the MRTU days, right? But we'll go back and look for that, Chris.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was just curious as to just maybe, you know, trying to monitor this. If you guys go forward and implement
Absolutely.
the PG&E proposal, then it would be helpful to us, I think, to know if this ever occurred. But, you know, given that explanation that Alva made, you know, I think it's probably unlikely to occur anytime soon until there's maybe more extreme situations. And, you know, perhaps like next summer, if that does occur, then it would be good to let folks know and just, you know, document that in some way. So we would support that and appreciate the response and explanation. Thank you.
Yeah, and if for any reason that this is starting to happen more often, we will be asking for turning off this constraint. If we found out that it is happening because of this constraint, we'll turn off the constraint and file, you know, to FERC, you know, about what is happening. So we have that authority to do an emergency change, right? So I think we have done all of the mitigation, even in the mathematical formulation. We have some manual or mechanical ways of also reducing the risk. And like the last thing is of course, is to turn off temporarily the constraint to see what's happening. We have all of that things that we can do.
Seeing no more questions in queue, Danny, would you like us to proceed or go ahead? And I think we already.
Yeah, I think we've covered today's material. I wanted to thank everybody who's still on the line for calling in today.
Oh, great. Thanks, Danny. So behalf of the, go ahead,
Yeah,
Colin.
Brenda, I just wanted to make sure that people knows which system that has those implemented. I just want to be clear that people understand, is it in map stage? Or, you know, I just want us to indicate to everyone where they can see the results, or if they want to try to do some testing, which system it is. Frank?
Sorry, Howard, was that a question for me?
Yeah,
Okay, sorry. Yes.
So
let me elaborate on what Howard was introducing. Thank you. So this functionality is active in the map stage environment and available to our customers to test there. And the day ahead and real-time constraints are active as of trade date September 30th, and we do have those hourly attenuation factors set for trade date of September 30th as well. And for those that are looking for details on what those factors are hour by hour, and any other supporting information as far as guidance on data inputs and such, can refer to the posted market simulation forum presentations from the release planning page under fall 2023 release. So, and this functionality, again, as Danny mentioned, will remain active and in market simulation through this Friday, October 13th. And any questions should be addressed or submitted via city and or to marketsim@kaiso.com when it comes to the market simulation environment and activities there.
Actually, we'll keep it active, Frank, till, you know, it's not only to October 13, but market sim is to October 13 because we want to look at the results. But we'll keep it active on map stage after that.
Yes, that is correct. Yep, the functionality will remain active indefinitely. And the guidance is, again, we want to encourage testing sooner so that we can have these conversations while we're in the period of market sim this week. But of course, we'll continue to support testing after that as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think, Brenda, we can close now. We took a lot of more time than.
Yeah,
no problem. Thanks, everyone. We appreciate it. We have other calls going on that will help out, but thanks so much. Let's go ahead and close this call, Adrian. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. You may now disconnect.